So I want to affirm that we are on the lands of the Piscataway Conoy tribe, the Nacotchitec people, and the Manahoac people, the rightful past, present, and future inhabitants of this land. We further affirm that this county, state, and country were built with the stolen labor of enslaved African people, and we resolve to center racial justice in all of our organizing. So once again, thank you all so much for being here with us and for helping us to have this amazing conversation about housing. Housing is one of my top topics when I talk about the campaign. If you've heard me talk before, you know that I love to talk about housing. And one of the reasons why this is so important to me is, first off, because housing is such a basic human need. It is essential for each one of us to have shelter in order to live and be healthy. And where we are housed is one of the fundamental ways that we define even who is in our community. We often start by defining that by where people live, where their residence is located. And so when we think about housing, it is so basic to everything else that we do. And yet, here in Montgomery County, in the DMV region as a whole, and across the United States, we are facing a severe crisis when it comes to housing affordability. We are seeing that people are spending, the guideline for affordability is that you should spend maybe 25 to 30% of your income every month on housing costs, but we are seeing people spend 30, 40, 50, 60, and sometimes more on their housing each month here in Montgomery County. We know we are seeing a tremendous rise as a result of that unaffordability in housing and that precariousness of trying to meet the rent every month. That we are seeing more and more evictions as people fall behind in their rent. And as they are not able to pay to be able to stay in their homes. And that's on the rental side. Even when we're talking about on the home ownership and the home sale side, we are seeing that folks, when they want to be able to buy a home here, that they are struggling to be able to meet the housing prices that we are seeing in the market, where a new home can run hundreds of thousands of dollars and be really affordable, especially for young families, for single folks, and for many other kinds of people who want to be able to live in our county. And if folks want to be able to stay in their homes over the long term, we are seeing challenges around an increased tax burden, as well as challenges around how you adapt your home over the long term in order to be able to move through the different stages of your life. So this is such a critical challenge for folks in our community. And one of the things that we know is that housing insecurity or not having a home makes everything harder. It is harder to go to work. It is harder to learn in school. It is harder to make sure that you are maintaining your health. Everything is more difficult when your housing is not stable. So when we invest in good housing for everyone in our community, it is actually one of the most powerful and cost-effective investments that we can make, because it provides us that baseline where a lot of the other challenges that folks in our communities are facing can be much more effectively addressed and much more cost effectively addressed if you're not also dealing with the impacts of housing insecurity. We need to make sure that our public officials are actually bringing forward the kind of solutions that we need to address the magnitude of the problem that we're facing. And unfortunately, time and time again, we don't see that kind of urgency and creativity really being brought to the question of how we ensure housing for all of our residents. I know that back in 2021, as we were looking at the legislative session in Maryland in the General Assembly, and then I was devastated as I watched the General Assembly close in 2021 without passing adequate housing protections, right in the middle of a devastating pandemic that we know was having impacts not only on people's health, but on their livelihoods, and we still weren't protecting people to keep them in their homes. More recently, even though the council was able to put measures in place for rent stabilization over 2 years of the pandemic, those measures just expired. Our current county council allowed those measures to expire on May 15th. And what housing advocates know and have been saying to them for months is that as soon as this happens, we are going to see people face massive increases in their rents that are going to put people further behind, people who are already struggling to make rent, people who couldn't do it before, people who, if the rent is raised just that extra bit more, or sometimes as much as 20 or 30% or more, that is simply not going to be affordable, and it is going to cause people to lose their homes and have to leave our county. We're seeing that at the county level, and we're seeing that at the city level. And we're also seeing that when we talk about housing solutions, we tend to over-rely on either outdated or inadequate tools. So much of the debate centers around whether or not we're going to tweak the moderately priced dwelling unit or MPDU program from 12 to 15% in a couple of key locations, or whether we're going to allow a few hundred units of accessory dwelling units or ADUs. And while these things are valuable pieces of the puzzle, they are not going to help us meet the critical needs for hundreds of thousands of our residents in this county. So we need to make sure that we are actually bringing the kind of solutions that will help us meet this crisis at the scale that we need to meet it, and in ways that center the voices of our most vulnerable and most marginal residents when it comes to our housing system and when it comes to unaffordability and housing injustice. And that is why I am so excited about the panelists that we have this evening, because they are just absolutely amazing. And they are going to be able to talk to us about the ways that they have been involved here in the county and other parts of the state in organizing to actually meet the need for affordable housing in ways that are just, that help keep people in their homes and in their communities, and that help build a more sustainable future for everyone. So I am just thrilled, and I can't wait. I'm going to get right into it and introduce these tremendous speakers. The first speaker that I'm going to introduce is Mrs. Eneshal Miller. Eneshal is a 25-year resident of Montgomery County in District 14. Eneshal enjoys her family and is a lifelong learner, currently employed at United Community Supports of Maryland as a direct service provider, and has been serving in that space for over 19 years. Eneshal believes that it is critical for us to steer public opinion to recognize housing as a human right, because housing is essential for every one of us. Our next panelist is the Honorable Virginia Onley. Virginia has been a community leader in Rockville for 28 years. She has served on the Human Rights Commission, the Rockville Senior Citizens Commission, the Rockville Housing Enterprises Board, the 2012 Rockville Charter Review Commission, and on the Americana Center Homeowner Board, including as past board president. Virginia served for 6 years as a Rockville City Council member from 2013 to 2019. And finally, Meleny Thomas is the executive director of the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. She has over 15 years of serving youth and families and building community-based organizations. Meleny believes in equitable development, and she continues to advocate for marginalized communities like the one in which she resides. She holds a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in nonprofit management and leadership, and is currently finishing her dissertation in public policy and administration with a specialization in nonprofit management and leadership. Eneshal, Virginia, Meleny, welcome, and thank you so much for being here. It is just a joy to have you. I literally could not be more excited than I am right now on this panel. And so, thank you. With that, I want to begin with a question for all of us to start us off. And I actually want to talk about this idea of housing as a human right. This is a phrase that sometimes gets talked about in housing policy and advocacy circles, but we rarely unpack what we actually mean by it. And so I want to start, and any of you can begin with, what does housing as a human right mean to you?
Should I start?
Go for it.
Okay. Well, I think that, you know, housing is a basic need. And unfortunately, we have not put as much emphasis in this country, in this state, in this county, and in the city of Rockville, which is where I live and I served on the housing board. We have not put a lot of emphasis on that. I can tell you now that in the city of Rockville, there's a backlog of 3,000 people. So we have 3,000 people on the list, and we turn over about 15 units a year. So, okay, you can do the math. If we only provide 15 units a year, because that's, you know, that's all we can provide, how many years is it going to take us to provide housing for 3,000 people? And as time goes on, that list grows. It does go down every now and then, but it mostly gets larger. And a one bedroom in the city of Rockville will cost you more than $1,800 a month. A two bedroom in the city of Rockville is $2,500 a month. When I was on the housing board, we purchased Fireside Park apartments to keep it affordable. It was 236 units. I was not on the council at the time. I can tell you that it was a split vote. There were 5 people on that board, on the mayor and council boards. It was a 3-2 vote. We barely got approval to purchase that along with the county and with the city so that we could protect those houses. The council members who didn't vote, they wanted a developer from Florida to purchase it. You know, we unfortunately lean towards the wealthy and do what is necessary so that, you know, wealthy people can afford to live, but we don't think about people like me. And I've been a young single mother who needed housing, and my blessing was I was able to move back to my parents' house. So I stayed there until I got a better job and got up on my feet and was able to move on. But I've never stopped fighting for people who need affordable housing. The city of Rockville, in the last 60 days, they did open their list. They had 1,000 new people apply, but they can only afford, you know, they can only afford to provide, or they only have the resources, I guess is a better term, to provide for 15 people a year. And we've got to do something. We've got to elect people like Brandy who are interested in making affordable housing a right, because, you know, it's your right as an American, as a resident, to have decent housing. And unfortunately, it's like the last thing that we think about. As new developments come online, we say 12 to 15% will be affordable, but we also give the developers payment in lieu of. So instead of actually providing the housing, you can make a payment to the city, but the payment does not equal the 15% that you're getting out of. And I guess I should shut up, because I could talk about this all night, because I have lived it. So I feel what people are feeling when you have a family and you need to provide shelter for them. And that's all I'll say. If anybody has any questions after my other colleagues speak, I certainly am open to any questions or concerns or comments. There's things I think I can do as an activist for housing.
Absolutely, and we're going to dive in more to that example you talked about of the building that you worked with tenants to purchase, because I think it's one of those critical tools that we are often not paying attention to in terms of the ways that we can actually ensure a much greater proportion of affordable housing for our residents. So Meleny or Eneshal, chime in. What is housing as a human right?
Wow, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'll go next. This is Eneshal Miller. There's a story, the story of human rights, and in Article 25, it reads, everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his or her family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. So housing is essential and it is a human right.
Yeah. And I love that, again, talking about like there are international standards that we could actually talk about in terms of what it should look like to provide for our people, and just us, you know, as a nation that considers itself leaders in the international community, actually making sure that we are upholding the kind of, you know, common international standards that we see being talked about in the United Nations and in other groups across the world. Meleny, anything that you want to add? Housing is a human right. What does it mean to you?
Sure, thank you. I'll just echo what everyone else just shared. But you know, when we talk about rights that each of us are entitled to, you have families, some families that are not able to live by themselves. You have multiple families banding together, and that is a form of distress, right? That's a form of instability where families are not even able to fully embrace what it means to own or to live without extended family or other people in order just to make ends meet. We talk about one paycheck. You often hear the phrase, one paycheck should be enough, right? But for those that you know, may not or earn less than the minimum wage, how are they able to afford, you know, some of the rents that we just heard shared throughout communities? So it is a human right. It's being violated in many cities and states. And it's time that we begin to take a look and not just look at affordable housing, but the key is, because sometimes that's often seen as a bad word, but looking at permanently affordable housing. When we change the narrative and change what it is that we're focusing on, then we're truly able to meet people where they are and understand the need at the level that it needs to be met.
Absolutely. And, you know, a couple of folks have referred to this, so I want to just throw in some numbers as we talk about what affordability actually means for people. And so Montgomery County's minimum wage, you know, we're reaching that standard where everyone's going to be at $15 an hour. Some folks are already there, and other folks are catching up depending on the size of the business that they work for. For someone making $15 an hour, working a full-time job, you would need to have a rent of about $600 a month to actually meet that affordability guideline for that 30% of your income. Now, that's for someone making minimum wage. There are a lot of folks in our communities who are living on fixed incomes. A lot of our seniors, a lot of our folks with disabilities. This came up actually in a candidate forum that I was in last week. And someone pointed out that for those folks, they're actually looking at $300 a month, or sometimes even less, in order to, again, meet that standard of not more than 30% of their income going to their housing costs. Now you hear that, and then you hear these numbers of $1,800, $2,500, and you see the magnitude of the gap that we are talking about. And when we talk about things like the moderately priced dwelling unit program, that only targets folks who are making about 50 to 80% of area median income. So folks were making about 50 to 60 to like $85,000. So that doesn't even touch huge segments of our community. And we're just not having a real discussion about the numbers, is one of the things that I think frustrates me as a housing advocate, because people keep saying this word affordability like it doesn't actually have a real meaning. Like there's not actually an established standard in housing development in the real estate about what that should actually mean. And then making sure that we are actually working toward that. Yes. And so, Meleny, no, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to say, yes, it's affordability. It's not accessible. and if it is accessible, sometimes it is not safe.
Yes.
And so, we just constantly encourage participation towards improving and planning and disseminating distribution of housing, and so the needs can be met. But there's such a long list of identifying those individuals, as you touched on, our seniors who receive that fixed income. Most of them are the ones who look forward to applying for the rental assistance at about $400 a month, but it only lasts for 2 years. So, trying to remedy that for them is really difficult, and we really need better housing justice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, Eneshal, you and Meleny also mentioned that, like, when we aren't providing people affordable housing, we're seeing folks end up in deeply unsafe places that are full of mold, that are full of vermin. We have had more than one in the last 5 years explosion in housing complexes here in Montgomery County, where people have lost their homes, lost their belongings, and lost their lives. And then we are also seeing where we have families where living with your family member is the best option, but we actually have families that are doubling up, tripling up, this kind of overcrowding that we are seeing in our communities. That again is just devastating in terms of people really being able to have homes that support them and their loved ones to live well. And so, Meleny, I actually want to come to you, and because one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on this call is because you are the executive director of the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. And the Community Land Trust model, this is something that I'm familiar with from my time in Boston, where the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative was one of the premier models across the nation for how communities could take back control of land in their neighborhood and use it to ensure affordable development, including affordable residential development, commercial development, and even development of commercial facilities. And this is one of the tools that I really want to make sure that we are bringing to Montgomery County. And so can you tell us a little bit more about what a community land trust is, how the South Baltimore Community Land Trust got started, and some of the work that you are doing to advance housing as a human right?
Sure. Thank you again for the invitation to be here among such great leaders in the community. So with the South Baltimore Community Land Trust, the movement really started from community organizing around environmental injustice. And again, talk about rights being violated. We live I'm a 16-year resident in the Curtis Bay community of Baltimore. And in this community, we are overburdened with toxic pollution companies, incineration, landfills, chemical companies, and different things that harm our health, as well as the health of the community. So in organizing and getting and raising awareness about what incineration is and the ugliness that it holds, and how it really affects communities, and actually in the state of Maryland, Montgomery County and Baltimore City are the two that have incinerators remaining, right? And what we learned is that many people were, I guess the best way to say it is they were misinformed about what incineration really is and how it's been labeled and categorized as clean and renewable energy. So in getting together, we realized that, one, we looked at how some of the ways we're able to, how things like this are able to advance in communities, and it's because of ownership. Who owns the land? Having ownership of the land really does make a difference. So the group of high school students and Destiny Watford and Shoshonda Campbell, my colleague, they started the Free Your Voice group, and they were able to successfully defeat that proposal for another incinerator that would have been built in the community. And it took 5 years, but that just tells you that a lot of good work and things take time, because we didn't end up in a mess overnight, and we won't get out of this mess overnight. But what we do at the Land Trust, and what a community land trust model is we look at where the land trust owns the land, and the home or building, workspace, whatever it is, would be owned by another person. So with that, it works because there's a shared equity piece, to where the model, or the equity that families build as they're paying their mortgage, they're able to then split it with the community land trust to keep that home permanently affordable. So for us, we are targeting, for our first homes that we're developing, we have a current cluster of 10 homes that we're going to be bringing to the South Baltimore community. So we're really excited about that. It's been a journey to get here, but you know, we're making progress. We have site control, and we just acquired 2 additional properties that we're adding to the portfolio. But going back to what a community land trust model is, so land trust owns the land, homeowner the home or the improvement. They'll pay the mortgage company. They pay, say, a $25 fee to the CLT. It's an affordable housing land trust fee. And with that, when they want to sell their home, they have to sell to another person that's income qualified. So a person earning under 50% of the area median income and below. So, you know, talking about, you mentioned, you know, sometimes missing that target population and the most vulnerable people that are working in our communities and not being able to afford or qualify for homes. So with that model, again, it keeps that cycle and that money. It's a subsidy that keeps on giving, right? So, and when we talk about the subsidy, the subsidies are grant dollars. So we look at and apply for different grants to be able to build the housing, to keep it permanently affordable. And we work, so we aren't just we get people in homes and then we're gone. We're there continually. So we continue the education. We continue, you know, all right, you're in your home. You're going to experience some trouble or have some questions. Where do you go to? You go to the land trust. We're there. We provide ongoing stewardship and support to educate people on the process. One of the things that we've been doing is offering classes and just informational sessions on what in the world is a community land trust and how does it work, right? And really, in 2019, I had the privilege of visiting Albany, Georgia, where New Communities, the first community land trust that's 53 years old, I believe now, you know, that was formed, and they protected farmland, Black farmers, and now being there at that site, it just really, it invoked a lot of emotion because they now own a plantation. And talking about history, right? And being able to just push through and move through barriers. It is just truly exciting to see what can happen when we continue at an endeavor and an initiative such as the community land trust model. So it's not a new concept, but it's something that works, but we need to put in the work in order to make it work in communities. In Maryland and throughout other cities and states, there are various barriers that prevent true success of community land trust. And we have to, you know, really look at that and look at that model. And the main piece is in that shared equity model. You know, everyone wants to be able to reap and benefit and maximize and get the most from their investment. But at the same time, looking at this, what are we doing? The greatest investment that we're doing, we're helping people build equity, break generational curses, be in their, generational barriers, be in their own something to be able to pass down to their family. So we are, just really advocating and advancing this movement. We are one of 5 other community land trusts in Baltimore City, and we're among the newest community land trusts. There's Northeast Housing Initiative. There is the Charm City Land Trust, which is the oldest one in Baltimore City, and they first started stewarding land as well. And now they are building housing as well. And Northeast Housing Initiative, they have 11 homes. So they've helped 11 families thus far get affordable housing.
Yeah. And I think, you know, one, I love just like, again, the glow on your face. And as we're talking about, no, but this is what's exciting. I'm watching Eneshal like clap, and, you know, I have this excitement too, because, you know, what you're talking about is not just the production of a housing unit. We are talking about building community power. We are talking about restoring ownership of land back into communities from which it has been taken. We are talking about making sure that we are focusing on the folks who have the most need, of really creating opportunity not just in the present, but in the future. You know, there are folks who are asking questions in our chat about, you know, how do we address reparations? How are we going to like really deal with redlining? And as you're talking about these things, you know, this really gets into how are we shifting this equation? How are we even shifting our understanding of, you know, of what we believe is important when it comes to equity, value, like, you know, how you make profit off of housing, like totally changing those frameworks. And it's just one of the things that I think is so powerful, because there are just so many layers here to the way that this model tries to come in and really can bring a deep justice perspective. And then the last thing that I love that you pointed out is that you can be doing this neighborhood by neighborhood. And so as you are part of the 7 community land trusts that are operating in Baltimore City, you can see that combination of community land trusts, community development corporations, again, community controlled development happening neighborhood by neighborhood, and the impacts that you can be seeing across something like the whole of Baltimore City or the whole of Montgomery County.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, you know, Eneshal, again, I saw you clapping, and you're getting ready to dance around just like me. And I know Virginia had a little bit of a computer freeze, and she's going to be hopping back on with us in a minute. But Eneshal, can you talk about the work that you do organizing with low-income residents, organizing with residents who are homeless, and again, how this ties into ensuring housing as a human right for all of our community members?
Thank you for asking. So if I go back as far as my youth, and probably a little under the age of 12, I could see homelessness in my community as well in my family overall for more than 15 years. Just that is something that I've watched throughout my community as well within my family. So learning through that on my own to overcome that, I would normally journal, you know, what steps I had to take, how difficult it was, who was in my way, what was in my way, what type of meetings took place in my community that, you know, try to help or hinder, you know, sometimes I can't say if something is purposely done, but you know, if you're experiencing it, then it kind of feels that way, right? So looking outside of that, just literally promoting that organization in my mind to counter everything that I was seeing. And the first thing I figured out is that, oh, we definitely need to be in some of these local meetings more than we think we shouldn't. So that was first. So, you know, just literally tapping people, you know, because when you're homeless, you have a lot of time, but not enough time to, you know, you have disposable time. So learning how to take that time and sort of promote what I was trying to overcome for my own self, as well as other family members and community members, just being there and really screaming at people at that young age. So, you know, just learning how to scream really loud and, you know, let them know that, you know, this isn't a purposeful solution that you're coming up with. It doesn't make sense. You didn't factor in this. You don't know anything about that. You've never experienced these things. And so trying to give them an understanding is that how do you create any policy if you don't have any experience, or even if you quote unquote consider yourself an expert, where are your findings coming from? Getting an understanding of that, and again, a lot of more yelling and screaming and making myself heard in that regard. But one thing I do with individuals, because everybody's in a different space, we have 4 seasons. And if you think when you're homeless, you're kind of going through those outside, or you're just going through so much. So there needs to be sort of like a buy-in from, whether it's representatives, people in your community, or your family, to just have an understanding that you're displaced and that your displacement makes you unsafe, right? And that then turns into other issues, whether it's health or mental health. And so trying to channel all that in to see how I would work with unhoused residents and homeless residents was more so just taking them by the hand and saying, let's just pull some things back first so you can have an understanding of why you're really unhoused, is that it's not your fault. In all reality, even if you made $17 an hour, you still wouldn't be able to live in Montgomery County and afford your own 1-bedroom. It just wouldn't be enough, or it would be all of your money, So, taking their hand in that way. And then really with individuals, once you've been homeless for so long, it's health. So we kind of start there with them. What health things do you need to repair to get back into society, and what that's going to look like. And then on the emotional buy-in of this, a person has to trust again, because society has kicked it to the side, and helping them kind of find their voice, always saying, yes, it's great to yell at people when you're not in court, because this isn't a courtroom. Those are the only times that you need to, be respectful of everyone. But outside of that, no. If you're upset about what's truly going on within your community, you would be at that point, unless you are somehow been dehumanized to understand that housing is a human right, and that as advocates, we need to encourage participation and working together as it relates to what a real representative looks like, what decision-making looks like, what a buy-in looks like, what policies need to be redressed, what impact of displacement has on people as it relates to safe housing, accessible and affordable housing in Maryland, and reflecting inward effectively to proceed and connect through housing justice. And just reference staying close to those who are displaced and that are discriminated against and in need of assistance in locating services, working closely with them and bringing them a part of the conversation. Clearly, I do a lot of outreach, but the main goal is to help those individuals learn how to self-advocate like I had to do, and then just take charge from there. And just slowly remove some of those barriers. A lot of times it's just a lot of uninformed individuals making informed decisions for everyone else. And that's where it is. And thank you everyone for listening.
No, and you and I have talked about this, being in housing advocacy spaces and hearing folks, have these conversations, but then really recognizing that there's whole perspectives that are just completely missing from the conversation in a lot of places where we sort of like try and set up proxies for actually talking to the people who are most directly impacted. And what I am noticing, Eneshal, with you and with Meleny in this connection is, again, the relationality, the ongoing relationship building, the ongoing connection, the ongoing supports that are part of how we actually address these things for real in our communities in ways that are going to support people to get their needs met holistically. And that doesn't separate the idea of housing from justice in our environment, from health justice, from economic justice, recognizing how these are all intertwined and how people are dealing with the different aspects of them every day, how this comes around with educational justice, how this comes around with transportation justice. I mean, you can go on and on and on. These things are connected. And if we are actually dealing with one another as real people, then when we build out solutions and when we are talking with each other about what we need, we're doing it, either we're doing it in that interconnected way or we're not really doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to be involved in the planning and the distribution. That's
Yeah.
really important that we're right there, centered in whatever that's going to look like to make it best for those who really need that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Virginia, I want to have you chime in here, because when we talk about, again, that organizing people's power and shifting those models, what you were able to do at Rockville Housing Enterprises was amazing. And I want you to tell that story to folks about what you did.
Well, it wasn't easy. It was a lot of advocating, and it was a lot of going to each one of the elected officials, even though we didn't get a unanimous vote, but we constantly had to go to them. And I think, one of the things is making sure that we elect people who are committed to housing and affordable housing, and who also are working with others, because we will elect our favorite candidate who is for affordable housing, but then we're not looking at the bigger picture. We need to make sure that we only support people who are going to support us and our cause, because that seems to be the breakdown. And even with the cost of living, years ago, and I'm an old gal, but years ago, the cost of living and the economy were not so misaligned as they are now. We have this thing where the rich just get richer and richer, and people who are middle class and below middle class are not able to keep up with basic needs. And housing is really a basic need. It's not any kind of fringe benefit. So in making this housing project work, and the housing authority had the right of first refusal. So we were waiting for someone to make an offer. That's the Montgomery County law that extended that to Rockville Housing Enterprises. When we were waiting for the first offer, we had already voted unanimously that we were going to buy the apartment complex. It came in at $36 million. I almost fell off the chair. And so I remember the chair, Ed Duffy, looked at me and said, well, what do you think? And I said, we're going to keep going until we have the final door shut in our face. We're not going to shy away from this figure, even though we really needed to. And, by the grace of God and the grace of the three elected officials and Montgomery County's housing organization, we were able to do it. We borrowed some money from the county, some money from the city, and we were able to purchase that, because there were too many people in this city who were looking for a glamorous clubhouse that the developer had already laid out the plans for. And people, even some of the people who needed the affordable housing, were leaning towards, oh, well, we would love a clubhouse like that. What they didn't understand was, if once that clubhouse got built, they were not going to be able to afford to live there. They would have been immediately displaced. And so we did pull it off. Several years later, when I was on the council, the Rockville Housing Enterprises was ready to refinance to now upgrade the units. And that was another split vote, unfortunately. But the Rockville Housing Enterprises paid the city $1.7 million back. And there were still elected officials who said, I didn't vote for this before, I'm not voting it again. And had their votes prevailed, the city wouldn't have gotten the $1.7 million loan return. And then the housing enterprises would have gone belly up. So I say that to say, okay, I was working with a group of people who were really committed to keeping this complex affordable, but you also need county and state and local government, you know, the mayor and council of Rockville, you need a buy-in for everyone. So it's very important when you vote for your representatives that you know what they stand for and what they will do so that you can have basic needs like a place to live in.
Yeah. And, you know, I think there are two things that strike me, Virginia, about the story. One is that this is a tool that we have on the books. There's actually like law in Montgomery County that, you know, county housing agencies or city housing agencies have this first right of refusal when a property comes up on for sale that we could be leveraging to actually be able to purchase properties. And you know, someone told me, I can't remember, this was months ago, but was talking about the Summit Hills development in downtown Silver Spring, which is this massive, massive apartment complex where so many folks live. And that, you know, maybe about 20 years ago, I think it was, that whole complex came up for sale and the county didn't exercise its right of first refusal to be able to bring this massive property that houses like thousands of people in downtown Silver Spring, to be able to bring that under public control so you could keep it affordable in a critical area where, as we are seeing more development in Silver Spring, we're seeing rising rents, we're seeing that pressure. And so I loved when you first told me the story of what you did at Rockville Housing Enterprises, because really seeing a community advocate and an elected official advocate for the use of this incredibly powerful tool and organizing with residents who needed to be able to maintain their housing stability. So again, this theme, organizing with the folks in our communities who need this housing, having to put up that fight against whatever the different systems are that we are, you know, that we are seeing, that we have to fight against, and then really being able to use these different creative tools and creative methods to make an incredible difference in our neighborhoods. It's so important.
Because and sometimes, Brandy, it gets to be too much of a battle because, and I use this term all the time, NIMBY. You know, there are too many people, and for those of you who've never heard that term, it's not in my backyard. They feel for people who need the basic housing, and they feel it's a right. They just don't want it in their community. But if not in their community, then where? What do we go to another island? Do we go to another country? So it is very important that we continue to fight for basic housing.
Yeah, and actually, Virginia, what you were just saying ties into one of the questions that I want to highlight from the chat, because I want to shift to responding to some of these great questions, where there are actually two questions that Michael asked. One about policies to eliminate redlining, and then also the broader question of kind of how do we define this idea of enacting reparations for folks who we know throughout the history of our country, and definitely throughout the policy history of Montgomery County, have really been impacted by discriminatory zoning practices, lending practices. And again, this not in my backyard idea, there's so much of this that is also really deeply interwoven with structural racism, with the idea that people like did white flight out of the city to the suburbs, and this was the place that they thought they were going to get to escape being around Black people and Latino folks and Asian folks and all the other folks of color in our communities. And so that's embedded in this idea that, oh, I don't want those people and their housing next to me. And so how do we combat that? Because it's still a real pervasive attitude here in Montgomery County and elsewhere. That idea that somehow, oh, that was in the past and we don't actually have to deal with those legacies here in the present.
The only way we're going to combat that, Brandy, is we constantly stay focused and we stay on target. Because the problem is that we fight for a little while and then we kind of run out of energy, and we need to arm ourselves with more people who are going to join our fight. Because there are people that believe that it is a basic right. We make a little bit of noise. We make noise during election time. We try to make sure that the person that we're voting for is committed to this. And then we just kind of fizzle out. We don't keep our eye on the prize, I guess is the term that I should be using. But we just can't let up. If there are too many people, and now that this with inflation and people not even being able to buy formula, you know, there are just too many distractions. But we have to stay focused. That's the only way we're going to overcome this housing need. And we need to make sure that when we go in that booth and we vote for people, that these are people who are committed to the lower class, to the middle class, and to those who are in need.
Yeah. Meleny, Eneshal, any thoughts on how this ties in? And especially, I think both of you have talked about this day-to-day organizing fight, that it's not short.
Well, I'll say, this is Eneshal. I'll say that it's not that how big something gets. It's more so about the work that's put into it and the continuing efforts. Those small things seemingly will come to do something really big. If when you think about a person who has been unhoused for a long period of time, what will happen is that they never want to go down that road again. So you'll see them often having 3, 4 jobs, still not being able to afford rent. I will say that if you don't really understand what being unhoused means, then you really wouldn't have that fight that Virginia's talking about. And you wouldn't be able to even understand that if you didn't see a child maybe suffer with an opioid addiction that was in school and maybe that had their own place, or a person who lost a loved one and that was the second income that they had that helped them pay the rent, or a foster child aging out of the foster care system. And because the foster care system monetizes their money and manages it, they have no savings, or the family they was with had no savings for them. And those individuals become homeless. People who lose loved ones or a spouse. When we lose people have mental health disparities sometimes, and those loved ones that they left, that puts them in a different space sometimes. So there is a human side to this, that in order to really fight for this, you have to be human, really. You have to really understand it. It would be no different than when we see an animal outside that clearly has a coat on with fur, and God created that animal to most likely live in some form of condition outside, but we shelter those animals. We do that, and we need to have that same understanding with someone who has the same eyes as us, because those things are just common things that we have in common. We all have eyes, ears, nose. Outside of anything else that people want to project on us, homelessness is, everyone goes through this. Everyone only makes just enough. And, this is not for those who can afford. We're representing individuals who have disparities, who cannot afford housing. And we know that workforce development is needed. We know that training and educational, but we also know that criminalization of people, so many the different biases, management, who's managing the funds that are allocated for housing. We have to be thorough in looking at those things too. So it is a big task, but it is can become, it can be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add in really quickly. When we talk about and look at this issue, we have to step back and really think about the work is trauma care too. Like this work, housing, we talk about reparations, we talk about, people being ripped away from their homes, generational homes being sold. There's so much trauma care that goes into this work. And that's really, like you mentioned it, trust, that's a big thing, right? And a lot of times a concept like this CLT movement is not a new concept. And this is just one of the tools in the arsenal. Like, it's just one of the tools to really help address. It's been proven to work, right? But it's just a matter of our policies in each city and state reflecting and supporting that, instead of making us have to start over. Because what happens is when something is not or a little bit different from the norm, what we're used to, the norm does not work. COVID has proven, the norm is not working. Like, we cannot stick to the norm. And I don't want to go back to what it was. We need change. I still don't know all that change entails, but at the same time, it's a matter of us continuing to take steps forward and continuing to have difficult conversations and continuing to understand that we cannot just continue to say, well, oh, if it doesn't, or think if it doesn't concern me or affect somebody in my circle, that it's not my problem. Or if I don't see it, it doesn't exist, right? I feel like that's a mentality that a lot of people have adopted, especially some people in positions that can make a difference, right? But if we really step back and as you said, like, be human, understand that these struggles are real. Everyone has a struggle that they're dealing with, and everything is rooted in trauma. A lot of the housing practices, lending practices, like, we have to change that because that's discrimination. A lot of things are rooted in racial discrimination, to where we still may not be able or have to go to extremes just to get qualified, right? We shouldn't have to continue to fight and prove that we deserve or we need or we can qualify. We should be able to live in whatever community we decide, and not be affected by redlining and all the different things that we experience. Homes should appraise for right and correct values, despite of the color of someone's skin, right? So there's so many things that we have to really look at and talk about when we're thinking about housing, justice, and just justice overall. Like, we have to look at it as a holistic approach, because if we continue to piecemeal this issue, we will not get to true success. And that's why, like, we are advocating and fully pushing for environmental justice and housing justice. We shouldn't have to choose between the two. We need and will work for both, right? We need healthy housing and we need healthy communities. And the way we do that is we begin to look at the issues. We begin to have those difficult conversations. We begin to regard and take seriously the reports of people that are living and experiencing it. Looking at asthma rates, looking at You know, who's being treated for black mold or toxic mold? Like, where are they living? What are the conditions they're living in? If you wouldn't put your dog in this place, why are you leasing this to someone else? I'll be quiet right now.
No, don't. I mean, again, I don't think we need to be quiet on here, because this, you know, I want to comment just as I'm listening to this conversation as I'm talking with you all, how different it is from a lot of the typical like housing policy and advocacy conversations and spaces that I'm often in. And I think, you know, there's a key here. Initially you mentioned it, but actually all three of you referred to it, about the fact that how much lived experience shifts the urgency with which you address this, shifts the perspective, shifts the process, shifts your willingness to get creative and not to accept the status quo. And I really want to make sure to name that explicitly, because when we talk about, when I talk about the importance of people participating in governance around the issues that impact their lives, you know, this is not just some Pollyanna thing. Oh, I think we should all get together and hold hands and feel included. It's because we have totally different conversations depending on who's in the room. You have totally different things that are prioritized depending on what kind of experience and perspective people are bringing, and whether or not they view addressing this as something that's like, no, I have to address this because this is my housing and this is my family's housing and these are people in my community that I love. So no, I cannot wait for this to be addressed somewhere down the line. Or whether you were talking with people who are like, well, it would be a good idea someday if folks were housed. That sounds really great, but it's not urgent to me because I've got mine and I can go over here. And just, I really think it is critically important. And I have seen this in so many places around the difference in total framing of the problem, as well as the kinds of solutions that we bring forward when we actually have the folks in the room who are most directly impacted by the problem. I mean, Meleny, the fact that you are bringing up that so much of this has to be grounded in trauma-informed practice and healing care for ourselves and our communities and all the different places that we are going to experience trauma around housing. Lord, I wish that was the conversation that we were having in housing advocacy circles in Montgomery County. Because and I don't want us to be quiet. And I love, initially you talk about having to yell, Virginia, that you talk about having to go toe to toe with people, because we have to keep saying it. And like you said, keep that focus and really talk about the real things that are going on here. And so we're coming to that point. Oh, again, I could have this conversation for so long, for like days and days with each one of you. But I do want to be respectful of our time on the call. So I want to ask, and again, this is responding to some of the questions that we've seen in the chat. And the question of how do we bring this to scale? And sometimes I hate using that phrase because there's all sorts of weirdness in that phrase, but what does it take for us to begin to shift either the policies that we have on the books or the processes that we are using to begin to make this so that, as Hannah commented in the chat, we've done the pilots, we've tested this, we know that this works. We've seen how these things work. So what's the shift that we need to make so that instead of doing this in these small, maybe do a little project here and a little project there, that we are actually doing this as the way we do business and bringing all of these different tools together in as many places as possible. So really quickly, as we wrap up this section, what's one thing that you want to see us shift so that we are doing this at the scale that it's needed? And Meleny, I see you come off mute first. So
yeah, so if we want to get to scale and really look at it, we have to, our political officials and leaders need to be on board and truly understand that, this is an issue. That housing is a human right, the trauma care and everything that encompasses and falls under that needs to be prioritized. One of the issues that we're running into is different types of housing that are being restricted in our area, for instance, condos under a shared equity model, right? It's a restriction for Maryland law. So that is something that we would like to see, looked at. And when we talk about scalability, we have to include multiple types of housing, right? Different types of housing to be able to scale to meet the need. So if there are barriers in, different outside of single family homes, then we won't reach, be able to reach or maximize scale. So looking at how and what barriers are in place, whether that is state law that will prevent or prohibit, truly being able to scale up and provide more units for housing availability, as well as services to be able to help people, wraparound services to be able to help them stay housed. We're not just talking about getting people in homes now, but keeping them in their homes. And that takes community, and that takes trust, and that takes that trauma work and that trauma care. And all of that just really needs to be looked at.
Awesome. Thank you, Meleny. Virginia, I see you off mute, and then Eneshal will come to you for the closing word.
Okay, well, I echo what Meleny said, because it does. It takes us working together, and we need to harness more people who are committed to finding, housing that people can afford. And we need to stay on the developers, and we need to make sure when we vote that we're voting, and that if we happen to have a commitment from someone that we're voting for, then that we will not vote them back in office. That is where it's going to start. It does start with community, but it also starts with making sure that we have the right people in our elected positions, and they are working with developers to provide what is needed for basic needs for the people that they represent. Yeah. And I also want to make one real quick, going off script here. We talked about the foster system. HUD does have a program. In fact, Rockville Housing Enterprises, and I was doing some part-time work for them, that they now provide foster vouchers. So Rockville Housing Enterprise got 16 of them are in use. That we have 16 young people who aged out of the foster system, and now they have houses through these foster vouchers. And then I'll shut up.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's a wonderful policy. And again, another group of folks that we frequently do not address their needs, and we skip right over. How are we helping folks to transition out of the foster system and make sure that they can have that stability as they are entering into adulthood and really being able to provide for themselves and move into their life and their dreams? Eneshal, wrap us up here. Tell us what we need to be doing.
Well, I want to thank both of the ladies for just tying everything in and just being so remarkable in our communities. Of course, I actually have helped people go into REI in Rockville. So that's like a program that we look at to help individuals find housing. And just everything they're doing out in Baltimore with Meleny, we just appreciate you for just going beyond what you thought could have been a barrier and just removing it, and having an understanding that trauma is another reason why people sometimes have issues with housing stability and stabilization. Outside of that, I just want to say that we again just need to, when I look across right now, I'm looking at what people are tying in as reparations. They're tying it in as a computer. That's not reparations. They're tying it in as a half of a roof done on a house that you don't even own anyway. That is not reparations. And reparations also is not the management of an oppression. They shouldn't be the conduit of that. Simply saying that even individuals who are having problems with housing, we all too have to get involved and engaged to see actually who's in the room doing the decision making. And as a community as a whole, you shouldn't think that somehow you're somehow special, because you're actually not. It is as simple as walking across the street and getting hit by a bus that you become disabled and you lose your job and you end up using all your savings up on things that you didn't even know what was going to happen. And then the next thing you know, you're in the hospital, and then the hospital eventually throws you out because all the money is gone. And then you're at the shelter, most likely. That's how things play out. So, to this group, if you were truly listening to us, you wouldn't believe that, oh, this task, it's too, the ideas are too small, or it's not big enough. It's as simple as when you went to school, that you had tasks that you had to complete, you did them, and it was all put in this nice little, packet, and you received an A at the end of the year. That's how organizing looks. It looks the same way. It starts with an idea, and then it grows, and then you find those invested individuals, but you also find those individuals who actually can teach you something and tell you something about why something doesn't work. And then that saves you. Well, but who doesn't want that debt ceiling, right? Who doesn't want that? So then that becomes a thing, and then that thing becomes a solution. So you first have to care about the situation. You have to care first, and that's how it starts. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. Can folks come off mute for a minute and just give, I need us to give some props to this amazing panel here. This group of people are just outstanding. And the reason I wanted you all to have the chance to hear them is because I wanted to make sure that we hear a couple of key things. One, the solutions we need, they're right here. They are right here. They're right here in our county. They're right here in our state. We know that we can access them. What we need is to now shift the framework so that we can be putting these solutions into practice every day, all the time, on the regular, not as special cases, but as the thing that we are doing in each and every one of our neighborhoods, in each and every one of these situations. And that we are bringing all of the different kinds of tools that we have, and not just saying, all right, well, let's test this tool and then wait around and see, or I don't know, that tool feels too new. I've never tried it before, even though a bunch of other jurisdictions have. And we know how powerful these tools can be. And Michael, I know you've had your hand up, and unfortunately we're going to be coming to wrap up, but there's something that I wanted to address about the question that you asked in terms of policies to stop developers from influencing housing policy. And this ties in to something that Virginia was noting, something that other folks have noted in the chat. Part of the reason this forum is happening is because it is an election year. The 2022 primaries are coming up here in Maryland on July 19th. We have races on the ballot from our governor, lieutenant governor, comptroller, attorney general, all the way on down, our legislature, our state senators and our delegates, our county executive, our county council. I'm running for county council at large, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Our board of education, our state's attorney here in Montgomery County, our judges. This is an important election year for Marylanders, for folks in Montgomery County. And part of where this begins, as folks have been saying, is about who you have in office making these decisions, whether they are grounded in their own lived experience and the lived experience of people in their community, whether it's necessary they care, whether they want to make sure that those voices and perspectives are right at the center of the conversation, and whether or not you have folks who are going to treat this not as a thing that you can just let go on for years or decades, but as a thing where we have to be figuring out the tools to shift this right now, this very minute, because we cannot wait. There are people in our communities who do not have homes, who are living in terribly unsafe situations, who are sick and in danger and cannot do the things that they need to do for their full lives, and that's not acceptable. And housing is the fundamental place where we begin to address that. And as you have heard, where we can begin to address that in ways that are holistic, that are about bringing our healing together, that are about repairing historical and present injustices, and actually setting the stage for a more just and sustainable future. So what I'm going to do in just a few minutes, because I do want to try and not take us too much over time, but I want to tell you how we are organizing for housing justice in the 2022 Democratic primary, for which I am running. So I'm going to pop open my slides here, and we're gonna talk about it, because I am fired up, as you can hear, and I love these conversations. And this is one of our big opportunities to begin the organizing, not to end it, because it does not end on primary day. It does not end on the day of the general election. It is every single day, year in and year out, making sure that we are doing this organizing together to get the things that we need. So here we are. When we talk about the county council races, our county council currently has a total of 9 members, but we expanded it through a ballot initiative in 2020. So we're going to have 7 districts and still those 4 at-large seats. So there are 7 different individual districts and then 4 people on our county council who are elected at large to represent the entire county. And I'll shift just for a quick second so you can see. This is the map of the new council districts that we have here. And some folks are going to be putting the link into the chat for where you can find out more information about the new council districts, dig into where these lines are, and how you can find out and make sure that you know which district that you are in for that primary. Our primary is coming up. The new date for the primary is July 19th. So yes, it's after July 4th. It's getting a little bit into the summer, but it's still really important for us to make sure that we show up and vote, whether we're doing that in person, whether we're doing that in the mail-in ballot. And for the at-large seats, the top 4 people who in the Democratic primary go on to compete in the general election against the folks from any other parties. And so I am one of 8 candidates who are running for the nomination for these 4 seats. And you can vote for up to 4 candidates. So you can support me and you can support other people who believe in the kind of policy agenda that is really centered on meeting the needs of people in our communities. But as Virginia said, you got to make sure that we are actually focusing and holding people accountable and asking that question, are the people that we are voting for really focused on doing this in a way that is just and sustainable and actually engages the people in our community? So that's what we do. And you can check out, there have been links that have been posted about our platform. And our platform starts off with talking about 2 things that are critically important to me. Democracy is actually very important to me, and making sure that we are engaged in the decision-making that impacts our lives. Again, not just every 2 or 4 years, but absolutely every day in the way that we are crafting legislation and public policy to address our concerns, and making sure that this is rooted in justice and equity and inclusion, and that we are not continuing to marginalize and leave people out in the way that we make our policy and the results of our policy decisions. You can learn more about our platform by going onto our website. And again, those links are being posted in the chat. And so let me just tell you, as we are organizing, we have, what are we at now? I think we're at 57 days until this primary. And so we are organizing, we are out talking to voters, we are raising funds. I want to give props to Laura. Thank you for your support, for highlighting people donating to the campaign as a way that we are supporting and making sure that we get the elected officials we need into office. I am a publicly financed candidate using Montgomery County's public election fund. What that means is that if you're a Montgomery County resident and you contribute to the campaign, your contribution gets matched up to 4 times. We were the first county in the state to do this back in 2018. This model is beginning to spread to counties and to cities across Maryland. We want to make sure that we use it and that we show how by using the public election fund, we can be electing people who aren't accountable to wealthy interests, who aren't accountable to developers, but who are accountable to the people in our communities. And when we make that investment, it gets matched by the county. You can make any donation from $5 all the way up to an aggregate total of $250. And when you give, again, that matching multiplies your money. If you give $50, it becomes $250 with that match. If you were to give the max of $250, it becomes $700. Literally, this is the best investment. My money doesn't multiply like this anywhere else in my life. This is a tremendous opportunity for us to really build our power in elections by the way that we finance our candidates. And every member of your household can give individually, so long as they control their own funds. And that includes even young people. We have had high schoolers invest in the campaign when they control their own funds, because they are also deeply invested in seeing powerful change in our county. I also want to note as we wrap up that our volunteers. We want to make sure that folks are helping us get out, share with people about the vision and the platform of this campaign, connect with folks, volunteer, help to turn out voters, help to make sure that we're represented at polling places, help to make sure that we're represented at community events. And so our primary pledge form, which again, people are posting that link in the chat, this is where you can sign up to help make sure that we are reaching people across this great, big, beautiful county, that we are engaging them, and that we are making sure that folks come out to vote for the July 19th primary. And lastly, we want to make sure that everybody is prepared and ready and able to vote. So our voter hub on the website, it's where you can check and get voter information, make sure that your voter registration is up to date. It's where you can make sure we provide some guidance so that people, everyone knows what their rights are to be able to vote and be able to participate in this election. And you can even let us know what's your vote plan. And we will be following up with you and helping to support you in making sure that we can help you get your vote heard and make sure that other people in your community can get your vote heard. You can vote in Montgomery County, you can vote, or in Maryland, by mail. You can vote by mail for any reason or no reason at all. I have requested a mail-in ballot. You can vote in person during early voting, July 7th to 14th, and you can vote on primary day, July 19th. So there's lots of different opportunities to vote, and you can find this information on our website. And so I just want to close. This is where you can get connected. You can contribute to the campaign. You can take that primary pledge. If you have questions or want to follow up on this amazing conversation, you can email us, you can call us. We love to respond to people. We love to talk to folks about these issues. And we get really excited. As you can see, I get really excited about the work that we are doing here, because this is what it looks like for us to build together, to share our knowledge, to organize together, and to ensure that we get what we need and what we deserve for our communities. And so with that, I just want to say a whole bunch of thank yous. Again, thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation, because this just, nothing makes me as happy as being able to talk real good housing with real good people. So I want to give a tremendous thanks to Eneshal, to Meleny, to Virginia. You are brilliant. You inspire me. And I am so thankful that you helped us to have this fantastic conversation. I want to say thank you to our language justice team. Our interpreters are on point. They are amazing. They are helping us to make this conversation accessible to more and more people. So to Jill, to Sean, our ASL interpreters, to Kidan and to Rahel, our Amharic interpreters, and to Kendra and Magdalena, our Spanish interpreters. Thank you, thank you, thank you for helping us to make sure that we can make these conversations accessible to our community. Thank you so much to our tech team. Thank you to Michelle, to Carol and Eliza, again, for helping to support this big and complex event as we try and push our edges and really do powerful things in our community. And then last, but absolutely not least, thank you to each and every one of you for coming and being part of this conversation. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your engagement. This is where our organizing begins and continues. This is the work that we want to keep doing every single day. So connect with us. I know that different folks have been putting their information in the chat as well, so you can connect with them. Let's build this network so that we get this kind of powerful public policy that will ensure housing as a human right for every resident in our community. And with that, I just want to say again, so much appreciation to all of you. Have a tremendous night, and we look forward to connecting with you very, very soon.